The title, not only as substance but also as subject, comes from a famous sentence in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Hegel writes that we must grasp the absolute not only as substance but also as subject. What does this mean? Substance is everything that just is. It is the solid, stable, objective world. It is the nature, tradition, the state, the laws of history. Substance is what exists independently of us. Think of it as the heavy, unchanging background of life. Subject is the opposite. Subject is the active, restless, negative force that moves through substance, disrupts it, changes it, and gives it meaning. Subject is the I that thinks, doubts, and acts. Most people read Hegel as saying reality is not just a dead, boring substance out there. Reality is actually a living, thinking subject like God or absolute spirit. But Zizek argues this is completely wrong. Hegel is not saying the universe is a giant person. Instead, Hegel is saying that substance itself is not complete. It has a hole, a gap, a failure in it. And that hole is the subject. The subject is not a big, powerful thing. The subject is the name for the emptiness, the restlessness, the not allness of the world. The subject is what happens when substance realizes it is missing something. To understand this, Zizek goes back to Kant's ideas of beauty and sublimity and shows how Hegel pushes them further. Beauty is when an idea fits perfectly into a physical form. A beautiful statue perfectly expresses the idea of a hero. Beauty gives us pleasure, it makes us feel calm and complete. Sublimity is the opposite. The sublime is when the physical form completely fails to express the idea. Think of a violent, stormy ocean. The ocean doesn't look like infinity, but the sheer size and power of the storm hints at something beyond all forms. The sublime gives us a mixed feeling: pain because the form fails, and pleasure because we get the hint of something greater than any form. Kant says the sublime is a negative presentation. We can't show the infinite directly. We can only show our failure to show it. And Kant says the Jewish religion is the religion of the sublime. The commandment, thou shalt not make any graven image, means God cannot be represented. Any image of God would be a lie. God is the unpresentable, infinite other. Hegel agrees with Kant about all of this, except for one small but world changing detail. Kant still thinks that behind the failed representation, behind the stormy ocean, there is a real positive thing in itself: God the infinite. The failure of the image points to a real existing transcendent something. Hegel says no, there is nothing behind the curtain. The failure is all there is. The infinite, the thing in itself, is nothing but this failure of representation. The void is not a sign of something else, the void is the thing itself. This is the ultimate speculative move. It changes everything. The sublime object is not a grand, terrifying storm. The sublime object can be a tiny, worthless, disgusting thing. Why? Because a tiny, worthless thing can also occupy the empty place of the thing in itself. The gap between the thing and its idea is infinite, so anything can be elevated to the level of the sublime. Hegel gives the most shocking example of this in the Phenomenology of Spirit. In the section on phrenology, the old pseudoscience of reading personality from the shape of the skull, Hegel writes the following insane sentence: the spirit is a bone. At first, this sounds like stupid materialism. How can the spirit, the most free, invisible living force in the universe, be a dead heart piece of a skeleton? It seems like a category error, a bad joke, but this is exactly Hegel's point. The proposition, the spirit is a bone, is a perfect example of a speculative proposition. It is a sentence where the subject, spirit, and the predicate bone have absolutely nothing in common. They are radically incompatible. Reading this sentence, our understanding breaks down. We'll feel a sharp, unpleasant shock. We say that cannot be right. And that shock, that failure of understanding is the truth. The spirit is not like a bone. The spirit is the failure of any predicate to capture it. The spirit is the absence, the negativity, the not this. By saying the spirit is a stupid, inert bone, Hegel is forcing us to experience the gap between spirit and every possible positive thing. The bone is the object that gives body to this empty gap. The bone is the sublime object par excellence, a worthless leftover that stands for the nothingness at the heart of the subject. The same logic appears later in phenomenology. Hegel writes another shocking sentence: wealth is the self. Your self is supposed to be your innermost, unique personal identity. Wealth is just a pile of money, an external, cold, inhuman thing. How can these be the same? Hegel is describing the world of absolute monarchy and court flattery. The noble servant flatters the king. He empties out his own pride, his own convictions, his own self. He says whatever the king wants to hear. In this act, his inner self disappears. So, where does his self go? It goes into the external reward. He receives money and wealth. His identity is no longer inside him, it is objectified in the cash he gets paid. His self has become external, a thing. The courtier's very sense of who he is literally in his blank account. So, yes, wealth is the self. Once again, the most inner and spiritual thing, the self, is identified with the most external and material thing, money. This is another infinite judgment that forces us to confront the gap at the heart of identity. Zizek uses Hegel's logic of reflection to explain how we get to this strange point. There are three stages. First, positing reflection. This is the simple act of a subject saying, I am the author of my world. The subject posits or creates its own reality. This is the active Fichtean subject. Second, external reflection. Here, the subject realizes it cannot create everything. It depends on a world that is already there. The subject's activity always bumps into a presupposed given substance. The subject is not God, it is limited. Third is determinate reflection. This is the crucial Hegelian step. The subject realizes that this given external substance is not really external. The subject presupposes itself in the form of its own other. What does that mean? It means the subject must choose what is already given. It must affirm its own unfreedom. Remember the soldier forced to swear the oath? He did not choose his country, but to be a subject, he must act as if he freely chose it. He must look at the external laws and customs and say, yes, that is my will. The subject posits its own presuppositions. It retroactively claims as its own free act the very things that were forced upon it. This is why, for Hegel, a modern state needs a constitutional monarch. The monarch does nothing. He has no real political power. He just signs the laws that the parliament and ministers have already written. He takes the already existing law and adds a purely formal empty phrase, this is my will. This gesture is completely useless in practical terms. The law would be the same without it, but Hegel insists it is absolutely necessary. Why? Because this tiny, idiotic gesture is the point where substance becomes subject. It is the point where the cold, impersonal machinery of the state, substance, is pierced by the empty form of subjective freedom. The monarch is the sublime object of the state, a real, living person who does nothing but embody the gap between the law and its enactment. Without his empty gesture, the state would be just a dead substance, an alien power crushing individuals. With this gesture, individuals can look at the state and say, "That is our will." We see ourselves reflected in that stupid, powerless monarch. The subject redoubles itself. It projects its own pure, formal freedom into the very heart of the substance that oppresses it. The same logic can be applied to religion. Judaism is the religion of external reflection. God is a transcendent, terrifying other who gives commands from outside. Man just obeys. This is like the subject facing a foreign substance. Christianity introduces the determinate reflection. In Christianity, God Himself becomes a man, Christ. The infinite, unpresentable God takes on a finite, miserable human body. The gap between God and man is now inside God Himself. God is not just the unapproachable master, God is also the suffering, dying servant. Substance becomes subject. The other is not completely foreign. The other has a hole in it, and that hole is us. This is the ultimate Hegelian lesson. You do not overcome alienation by destroying the external power. You overcome alienation by recognizing that the external power is already split, already failed, already dependent on you. You overcome the master not by killing him, but by seeing that the master is nothing without the slave. You take upon yourself the empty gesture of affirming what was always already there. Zizek calls the end of psychoanalysis subjective destitution. This does not mean becoming happy or normal. It means the subject no longer believes in the big other. The subject no longer tries to fill the void with fantasies. The subject no longer asks, "show why." The subject simply accepts the real in its meaningless, idiotic presence. The subject stops presupposing itself as a subject. It accepts that it is a leftover, a symptom, a bone. It identifies not with its ideal image, but with its own senseless, traumatic, real kernel. To grasp the absolute as subject is not to become a grand, heroic agent of history. It is rather to accept that you are the whole in the substance. You are the bone. You are the worthless, contingent, idiotic point where the world's necessity breaks down. And that, for Hegel and for Lacan, is the highest form of freedom. The freedom to be nothing but your own impossible, irredeemable symptom.